All right, I think we just jumped right into it. We didn't do a countdown this time.
Hold on one second.
All right, hello. Welcome to Grown Folks Business on our usual Thursday nights. I'm definitely gonna just jump right in. Things kind of took a turn this week in terms of what I was gonna primarily be discussing. Uh, the guy in Atlanta kind of put a somber note on things, and with his activities, mass shootings are never a good thing, and Robert Long is, perpetuating the normalcy of America in terms of just random acts of violence. But we'll get to that in a moment. We're going to start a little lighter, but in the realm of what the topic is tonight. I called it Black exploitation. And I think, as I've always said, my focus is media. That's one of the places we experience it the most in media, film, movies, TV, what have you. So I was having an interesting conversation with Merrill recently about some things taking place in the MCU universe in terms of film. And I gave him a little bit of my thought and analysis on what I witnessed in that world. And I'm interested to see what he may or may not agree with. But I'll start with one of their most recent shows, WandaVision. Fairly interesting show. Well done. MCU is tip top when it comes to production value, storytelling. When I was a youngster, the comic books I collected most were Marvels. So they have the storytelling game on lock. But the issue I had with WandaVision, and I've shared this with other people, but like I said, I'm interested in Meryl's take. In terms of Black representation, not enough of it. But primarily, one of the issues I took umbrage with was the fact that I think it's Captain Rainbow character. She's a Black female who goes through Wanda's magical wall twice, and sacrifices some elements of her body in doing so. Alters her DNA or something, becomes a superhero, so to speak. And she also, sacrifices her life without having to, because the bullets went through her at the end. And it's all spoiler alert, by jumping in front of the bullets being fired by a military guy who's the quintessential bad guy, to protect some imaginary kids, some magically created quick kids. All in all, interesting show, especially after the first 2 or 3 episodes, because it lost my attention early. Interesting show. I feel like a bit tropish with the magical Negro character inside of the magical world, who cares more about the white protagonist than herself, which is another part of the argument I'll stand on right now. And Meryl, engage me on all fronts, please. I also feel that Black MCU heroes are a bit tropish anyway. They don't seem to be fully developed. The exception is Black Panther, and some of that's debatable in my mind. But it doesn't take much to really develop and tap into that third dimension of a character in the cinematic world. But you see it done so well for, say, like the Winter Soldier character. It's pretty interesting backstory with that guy. But he's not a primary hero. But then someone like Falcon, he's he's a survivor of PTSD, but he seems more of a fanboy of Captain America who just follows him around and just is intent on being his friend. Even shows a little jealousy when Bucky, the Winter Soldier shows back up. And I felt the same way about Rhodey in terms of Iron Man. No real fully developed character, just a kind of a sycophant of the lead superhero. Maybe they're going to fix it, maybe not. I don't know. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is coming up soon too. So that's just my take. Meryl, take it away.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, man. I think it's the history of Marvel comic characters of color. Like, it's always been, those characters just kind of like throw-ins, because they were like, oh, we need to have some more diversity. You know, sometime around the mid 60s is when you started seeing some of those characters kind of thrown in. So because each one of those characters never was developed in the comic, this is a direct implication of not having Black writers involved with Marvel Comics to begin with until late. And when those issues started coming up inside of Marvel, just because I know a lot about, following the comic book company, a lot of the Black writers at Marvel left and they started their own comic book company. I believe it was called Image, and they had more developed characters. I don't know if you remember, what's the guy, Todd McFarlane? He did Spawn. Now, he wasn't Black, but he wrote a character that was like fully developed. It was intentional. It wasn't just kind of like, let's just throw in James, Rhodey Rhodes, or if anybody has seen Luke Cage, what he looked like back in the 70s when they first came out, he had on like a big yellow shirt with his chest out and a big afro, and every time he spoke, it was not in complete sentences, and it was meant to be like this broken English. And so I think that this is it's hard to develop those characters. And with Monica Rambeau's character in particular, there aren't people of color, with the exception of my man Ryan Coogler, who was not going for the okie doke when he did Black Panther. He was the only one that didn't necessarily have to follow these strict rules that Marvel has for their movies, but they wanted Monica Rambeau's origin of her power to make sense, because in the comic book, it makes no sense how she got her power. So they were like, well, what if we make her go through this wall and that's how she gets her power? So, but of course, that other part that you're talking about, like sacrificing her life to save these imaginary kids, risking her life. Like, I mean, it seems like there would have been some more thought about developing her origin story, or even that situation. But I will give them credit. I mean, like, there are other parts of her that were strong and developed. Because you can go back to the movie that her. Did you ever see Captain Marvel? Where her child, and that character of her mother was like decently developed. There's a character. One episode. Right, yeah, right? Well, it was fun, right? Yeah. I mean, we gotta start somewhere. Thor has a character, Valkyrie, who is not only person of color, but she is a lesbian character. So like they try to develop that and give her a little extra strength and stuff. So, but yeah, man, I think it's a function of just not having. There's just a history of nobody thinking about having the characters be more than just kind of like throw-ins from the beginning. So when you get them to the movie version, like, well, we'll just throw them in because nobody's going to see this anyway. They're definitely, Black Panther did not get anywhere close to the viewing audience that Avengers Endgame got. You know what I mean? Like, and the only reason that it got a little bit of mainstream is because it was part of this Marvel thing. If Black Panther hadn't been connected to this whole universe, I don't know what the actual viewing numbers would have been, because it just it's a throwaway.
I have to push back some on that. Black Panther was going to be successful, guilty by association, absolutely.
Exactly.
But there's consistently a hunger from not just Black audiences, from all audiences to be entertained in a different way. And the catalyst, and I know you know this, It's just sometimes people forget, but I know you know this. The catalyst for all of these MCU movies was Blade. Wesley Snipes' original Blade actually is what elevated Marvel Comics to where it is today, and it needs to get more recognition as being. And I know they're working on, I guess, a redo. I'm thinking
They're trying
that's what it
to.
is. Yeah.
That character is owned by Sony, so the difficulty, right? Marvel, because of their financial issues, they sold so many of their characters away because they were like, "Oh, nobody's ever going to option these guys out." So now they're stuck. They have these very complicated deals to just have Spider-Man be borrowed for a second, and so Blade is another one of those. Blade, Spider-Man, Venom. So yeah,
I think they're going forward with it. Marsala Ali, Oscar winner, has been tapped to play Blade. I want to say some of their financial woes were assuaged when Disney bought them. Of course, that fixes everything. But you're right. There's still that little gray area of tape. I know Fantastic Four was owned by Sony too. It's so many characters that it's spread out.
They're owned by Fox.
So there you go.
Sony's the linchpin. Sony owns Spider-Man, and they will not give it out. Mm-hmm. Fox was taken over by Disney, so Disney owns Fox. So like all the X-Men, all that stuff is owned by Marvel. But with Sony, they are holding tight to that Spider-Man because they know how powerful that is. So like, there's always going to be renegotiation. So yeah.
Okay, so they got one that they're gonna try to cash in every time. Gotcha.
I will never let it go. They should let it go.
Yeah. So yeah, before we stray too far, and I know you don't have much time this evening. I guess more or less, this is not the way I approach every form of entertainment to find something wrong. But when I see it, I got to say something about it.
Yeah.
Are you looking forward to better representation because of what you see now in terms of the Rambo character, or are you still thinking that it will be incremental? So my question is based in, we know something's coming that's been done before.
Right.
Blade and Black Panther 2. They're coming.
Yep, they're coming.
So do we get a standalone Rambo film, or do we get a standalone, another significant black character, or just a character that comes out of nowhere that's black?
I think it's going to run.
What are your projections?
I think it's going to run the course that the comic books did, because eventually what they decided to do was, we want to develop Monica Rambeau, for folks who are not into the Marvel comics, ended up being the leader of the Avengers. Luke Cage ended up being leader of the new Avengers when they kind of reformatted and stuff after this House of M stuff. And then Storm, the black character from the X-Men, became the leader of the X-Men. And it just was a natural progression. Over time, they were like, let's develop these characters. Let's get it away from having the straight white guy be the leader and everybody point to him, to like having diversity and leadership. And obviously it's, more women. There's a whole, I forgot the name. It's like a group of women heroes that I wish I could remember the name of. Misty Knight, the Rosario Dawson character from Luke Cage.
Oh yeah, I recall some of that.
Jessica Jones. They're gonna have their own little thing where So I think it's just gonna take that natural progression. I'm looking forward to it. And then, unfortunately, with brother Chadwick passing away, they're moving the Zuri character to be, Black Panther 2, and they're bringing Michael B. Jordan back from the dead. So.
Hey, I'm okay with Michael B. Jordan coming back. They should have left him alive in the first place.
My favorite character.
Killmonger was actually having some really good dialogue and conversations about some significant things in terms of Black Americans, and you see what they did to him. But yeah, man, glad you could make it for that part of engagement in terms of, and we have more to talk about there because I still have other issues with some of those superhero portrayals that I can unpack further. But I'm open to them going forward with these stories. I'm hoping that they don't signify the end. So if that's how things end up, that should not be how the stories just stop. Like, hey, pass the torch and we're not going. So I was kind of happy that when Captain America gave his shield to Falcon's character, pretty interesting take. And now we get to see how they do that via a TV show, which is fine.
Starts tomorrow.
Yeah. So it's some interesting opportunities. And I heard you guys mention the Justice League. I hear that the new version is going to focus on Cyborg being more significant. I find that interesting.
Yep.
I find it interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. Very interesting character. They didn't do much with him in the original. So let's see what happens going forward. All right, we've nerded out enough, if you want to call it that. I've enjoyed it.
Let me ask you real quick. Like, so what do you think about the portrayal? Like, Sam Jackson as being like a central figure within that universe. Like, what do you think about his portrayal?
I think they undid so much. For one, very mysterious character, never got his own platform, which is why he's often overlooked in my mind. You remember him for bringing the team together, but not much more beyond that. Does he have powers or not? We still don't necessarily know for certain. He's more like a Batman character. But I think they undid a lot of his significance and mystery, even with the Captain Marvel movie, where his origin story of losing his eyes, a cat scratched him. I mean, I felt like that kind of, and he's also running around, I'm a big proponent of black masculinity in films and in media, and he's running around. And I don't even recall Captain Marvel too well. It was not my favorite. It didn't even make my top 10 MCU movies. But it was not that good. But for one, they wedged her in to this. They could have saved her for later. They wedged her in, went back in time to include her. It was just a lot to unpack in terms, and why she's just now showing up in this. I've been fighting stuff all over the galaxy. Sorry, I've been busy. But no, it's so anyway, I thought he took a back seat, and they kind of sold that as being some of his origin story also, but it was much less his and more hers. Yeah. But anyway, that's it's just not a knock. Black Panther's not even in my top 5. So yeah, that we have more to discuss. No, sir. If I can remember them correctly, the first Avengers, the first Iron Man, the first the Winter Soldiers definitely in there.
Winter Soldier's up there. Yeah. Winter Soldier's number 1.
Yeah, Winter Soldier. Yeah, and I'm not naming them in order. Winter Soldier is a great movie. Gosh, the one where because I always forget it's so many Avengers. Civil War. That's a great one. Civil War was really good.
Okay. So you name 4.
And I'll even throw in Thor. Yeah, Thor Ragnarok. That was a great movie.
Ragnarok,
very entertaining. Super.
That's good.
Yeah, super fun. Yeah, and it changes, but Iron Man doesn't generally leave my top 5, and Civil War and Winter Soldier are locks also. But Guardians of the Galaxy came before before Black Panther, in my opinion. Anyway.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm with you.
Jess, how you doing, man? I'm sorry we've been ignoring you, man. How you doing? You got any takes on these Marvel movies, or you just here for the other stuff?
Not into the Marvel movies, but I did get into the comics. But I don't even. When did Spawn come out? Because
early 90s, like mid 90s, the comic book, early 90s comic book, the TV show, and all that stuff, mid 90s.
Yeah. All right. So, do you remember War Machine?
Yeah, that's Rhodey.
Yes. Okay. So I got the first comic book of that when that first came out.
Yeah, I actually thought that they were going to do more with Rhodey's character too, and of course everybody knows Terrence Howard played him first. And when he looks at that suit and say next time, of course Terrence Howard doesn't return because he was making more money than Robert Downey Jr. in the first one, and he was like, "I'm not taking a pay cut." I don't know what you guys are talking about. Understood that. I respect that. So he looks at the suit and says next time, and that was cool to hear. And you get to see Don Cheadle take over the role, but You could have made a whole movie with War Machine. People, it would have made some money. Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3 weren't that good.
I don't think I'd watch a War Machine movie.
Well, the story is what the movie requires, right? You write a good story and you include some MCU special effects, and Don Cheadle's one of the best actors of his generation. Yeah, they could pull it off, but they made him into a sidekick and they stuck with that. They were just like, he's not going to go beyond sidekick.
His character historically has been the company man, though, and I don't know if I want to watch a company man movie because there's no conflict there. He's always going to follow the rules.
Tony Stark's supposed to be a perpetual playboy, but he's set it down with Pepper Potts. You can change the stories for these films. I mean, and change them well. You don't have to make something, but I know what you're saying, though. And don't get me wrong, I'm so far removed from my remembrances of all of these comic book storylines, but I just remember I was a teenager or preteen looking forward to the making of these films, and I could not wait for them to make them. But when they first started out, the stories were just like, why are they making up? Just go get the stories from the comic books that made you every month you were just like running to the store waiting for this comic book to come out, or just looking for when is the next one coming. And they just it took them a while, and MCU did it first, and the MCU did it better.
Because you have to stick close to what people remember from the comic books. You can't deviate but so far. But I see what you're saying. Yeah,
you can have a character. Go ahead.
Have y'all ever heard of Static Shock?
Yep, that's one of the Image guys, I believe, that came out. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, that was when I stopped. I was winding down on collecting then, Danya. I might have already been done. I stopped collecting about 92, 93, something like that. But I had a good run from like 85, 86 to 91, 92, and I still have most of them. They're not in the greatest of shape, but some good stories, man. Really good stories in those comic books. If I could draw, then that was going to be my job, but I could never match those artistic skills of those comic book illustrators. I mean, some of the best artwork ever done is in the pages of comic books, man. But yeah, Ghost Rider was my guy. And it's mostly Marvel. The Punisher, great character. Spider-Man, of course. In the DC world, I don't know if you guys remember Lobo. He was pretty fun. I have a comic book where the Easter Bunny hired him to kill Santa Claus. Great stuff. I mean, it's comic books, man. You can just do whatever you want in there, and it's fun. But yeah, man, Merida, if you still got more time, you got to go.
No, I got to step away. I told him I'd be a little bit late. I told him I'd be there around 7:30ish. So let me go run. But this was great. I'm glad you had this topic, man. So absolutely, man, and we'll continue with it, man. Especially me and you can bounce this around for a while. Yes, sir. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and know that I agree that I'm hopeful that there's more to come in the MCU universe that it elevates everyone, primarily Black Americans at this point for me. But y'all take care. All right. You take care. Yeah. Look, and everybody watching, I hope everybody's okay with this tornado and stuff that's coming through. So everybody just take all the precautions you need to do.
Absolutely.
All right.
Be careful out there. All right. Take care, bro. All right. So I'm going to make do with you just for a little while here. And as I stated at the beginning of this thing, I kind of wanted to touch on the events in Atlanta. One of the things I wanted to make sure I mentioned in the context of that, unfortunate, terrible, tragic events. What we see when something like this happens and the prime suspect is a white person or a white man is majority of the time when it comes to mass shootings and things of that nature. The humanization that takes place of that person is what is being discussed a lot right now on social media, and a lot in the media in general. I think the first comments that were made, or some of the first comments that were made, were centered around him having a bad day, and centered around him being a sex addict of some sort, and that was the reason for the murders. I'm not someone that has intimate knowledge to know any better, but I just find it fascinating that it's okay that those thoughts are had publicly via the police officers, via the people involved. I would prefer silence until they know more and better, or we just don't know yet. But they can tell you that they don't think, and almost certain it's not racially motivated. And they can tell you, hey, he was a bad day, and he told us he was a sex addict, which is fine. If he told you that, report it. But the context is important. And we're at such a fragile time in this nation, in terms of race relations, in terms of shared suffering, in terms of Black American life, long bearing witness to these types of atrocities. And now other groups are being visited by them and are being heard. In some ways, debatably, more so than the Black people who've been dealing with them for generations. So it's all a lot to unpack. And I don't mean to make light of anybody's experience in accord to racism or violence, but there's a lot to unpack. And Jess, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the events that took place in Atlanta.
Well, I don't believe anything what that officer has said about that the person that was apprehended. For one, that story came out way too fast for them to bring that out. Two, if he was such a sex addict, why did he go to strip clubs and do that to it? Most of those massage parlors are Asian women that do that type of thing. So to me, I believe it was a hate crime, just like the way they are trying to push things under the rug with the people at the Capitol. The guy that sprayed that bear spray at that officer. RA making excuses for why they're not going to charge him for murder. If it was a Black person that did that, automatically it would have been murder charges.
Yeah, we're witnessing some fascinating things in terms of the defenses being given to certain behaviors, and it's so I will say, okay, let's actually give breath to the potential of it not being a hate crime, that he was a sex addict and he went to these type spas and massage parlors relentlessly, and that would be the place that he carries out this crime because that's what he was, that's where he had frequented so often. That doesn't lessen the tragedy of it being a focused group of people. Now, fascinatingly enough, when I watched some of the press conference unedited, the police officer who had made the comments about him having a bad day and things of that nature, he actually said, and he stepped back to the microphone to say that the victims at the place that he investigated, there were 2 white people that were shot also.
Yeah, but they weren't the workers. They were people actually getting the massages.
Yeah, but that brings it to the point, to the discussion. From my perspective, was that intentional? What was that? Who knows? But the police officer being sure to mention that, it kind of blurs any. He's trying to dead any discussions about race early. But the discussion should be had either way. like this is so much to really discuss and unpack. Those ladies who were murdered, those workers, they're in a low paying job that's contingent on probably, and I mean probably, dealing with certain behaviors from men that are disrespectful or borderline sexual assaultish, if I can say that. But there's so much to unpack, and here we are at a place where we can't even have a base level discussion without it branching out into so much hurt and pain associated with racism in this country. And it's amazing. If we ever deal with that, then we can deal with a lot of other things. It's my feeling. What do you think about that, Jess?
Dealing with government, because I work with government and I've seen what goes on in government, and it's this thing that you keep your mouth shut, where I never could, but was always in trouble. It was always kept back because I always spoke out for the good.
Yeah, it's
And
tough, right? Working in dealing with any entity that's tasked with preserving what they desire to be as society. Yeah, your observances are going to be met with immediate scrutiny, right? Is that what you're basically saying? Anytime you saw
right,
something, yeah,
right.
yeah, it's
It's
pretty wild.
it's like, I don't know if you see the officer from Atlanta, uh, where they put him. He had the news interview, and basically because that police chief in Cherokee, whatever county, uh, they're taking the main lead, but yet keeping everything under their vest until they're finished with the investigation. Now, why ain't because things happen in Atlanta's county? I believe that's where it first started. Um, and then that kid went to the Cherokee. Why isn't he sharing information with this Atlanta police officer? This the Atlanta police chief, I should say.
There's so many different ways you can go when it comes to conspiracy theories and who should know what and when. I mean, that goes right back to the earliest potential for what unfortunately happened in New York on 9/11. They actually have the documents to show that these organizations had communicated with each other, then we would have been in a whole different position in terms of what took place. But yeah, that I agree. There should be something in place that really requires these entities to communicate. What's been your experience with that, and when you were with the government?
I was basically because we go by certain rules. I was a construction inspector on a job, and I made sure they went right by the book. Now, because the contract was written in such a language that there were so many loopholes that they could have gone by, that when the attorney general's office came and actually stopped the job, they they basically was looking for people to rat on what was happening on the job, which nothing was happening. Everything was going by uh, the way they were supposed to, but because the way the contract was written, they didn't go after the people who are at the top, who are actually the ones that made these such rules that that were illegal. I would say. And so
Yeah. So
so
the
so when I brought that out, in a grand jury hearing. Now they said I was a rat for ratting them out when we were the guys that wrote this in the contract. I was just following the rules of what
Yeah.
was in that contract.
So what you were dealing with was something that was a little bigger and badder than what you were, even if you were telling the truth. And I think the term, what is it, whistleblower status or something along those lines is kind of what you might have been seeking. But yeah, when you see it all the time in law enforcement, or we don't get to see it, but a lot of times when people from bigger organizations decide to tell the truth about certain behaviors, I know there was a big stink up in Philadelphia around law enforcement and some of the officers coming out and telling the truth about planting evidence and things of that nature. But like you said, there's a structure in place that doesn't allow for elevating of the voices of the people who are on the side of justice to be heard, which interestingly enough kind of brings me to something I wanted to touch on before we got out of here this evening. And I definitely want to know how you if you've heard about any of this, Jess, and if you have any thoughts on it. Samaria Rice, and I hope I'm saying her name correctly. She was the mother of Tamir Rice, the young man who was shot. I think it was Ohio. Don't get me wrong, or don't hold it against me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Ohio. Yeah, he was a young kid. What was he? 9? He was a young kid.
Somewhere a guy 9 or 10.
Yeah, he was shot. He was playing with a BB gun. He was shot by a police officer. Murdered by a police officer. Well, I don't know if anybody watched, but this past Grammys, a rapper by the name of Lil Baby did a performance, and an activist by the name of Tamika Mallory came out and spoke in the middle of it. There's a lot to unpack there because, as all of you know who watch this show, I have issues with celebrities and people co-opting the Black struggle for gains. Not saying that they are not genuine in their position or how they feel about certain matters, and art is art. But man, I swear it was disheartening that Ms. Rice had the feelings that she had after witnessing the performance, because certain organizations and activists, as she states, have just taken the light, taken the money, benefited off the deaths of some of these Black men over the last few years, and her son being one of them. Of course, George Floyd being another. And she's not alone. Another parent of a victim, Michael Brown Sr., he's come out and spoken against Black Lives Matter, saying they need to send $20 million to Ferguson. They've exploited the deaths of these people's children. And I do find that fascinating, and it does bring a lot of questions to my mind as someone who cannot disagree with Ms. Rice or Mr. Brown. They are the primary sources of this pain and hurt and anguish. They lost children. And whereas other people, other victims of this type of behavior right now, the Asian community, the conversation we were just having about that piece of work, that guy who did the heinous crimes in Atlanta, they're coming out and they're having congressmen that represent their ideas and struggles around racism they've been dealing with for a year. Some of them say because of former President Trump's comments about the COVID virus, COVID-19. I agree. He elevated the attention to the Asian community that they're getting, the negative attention and the behaviors that they're experiencing. But whereas they get to vent through Congress, it seems like Black Americans resign themselves in certain aspects to entertainment or so-called art when it comes to music and such. And that's bothersome to me. And it pains me that much more to know how bothersome it is to the parents of two young men who were killed by police violence. I know I just said a lot, Jess, and you rolling solo tonight, but does anything I'm saying to you make sense in terms of how we should elevate Samaria Rice and Michael Brown? They should be on TV newscasts saying what they're saying. They should be getting the media's attention wholeheartedly for how they're feeling about the lack of real policy, of real legislation being passed to protect people from police violence, while they're activists and they're entertainers who seemingly are profiting from those young men's deaths. You got any thoughts on that before we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of Black women that are trying to address that issue. It pains me that that's what we resort to is entertainment. I think we should be more serious where, if you look back, we're the ones that basically built Washington, D.C. And we should focus on things where we're the leaders of basically constructing things, making policies for us, for other people of this country to prosper and get that. I hate to say that with the white element out of the picture.
So much. No, so you're right. So much has been done on our backs, and not just building Washington D.C., building the country.
Right.
And our pain and toil and activism has brought this country closer to what it says it has always been, to what it purported itself to be. And we still are suffering from exploitation, which was the topic of tonight's show. Like, what we are exploited, not just by, we are so exploitable that we are not just exploited by the powers that be, we exploit ourselves. And unfortunately, for you to make a better life here, you can make a lot of money exploiting Black people. And you can make a lot of money exploiting Black people if you're Black.
Yes.
And that's unfortunate. And that's the meat of my conversation and I'm trying to have tonight. And it's not easy to do in the backdrop of this nut job in Atlanta doing what he did. And it's unfortunate. And my heart goes out to those people and their families and all the people affected by such atrocious behavior. I don't want to end on that somber note. I want to say I appreciate you hanging in there with us tonight, Jess. I know it was a light night. Some of the usual suspects had other engagements and tornadoes and power issues. My internet's been on the fritz. It's just been a pretty, long day anyway. But I'm glad we were here to have a little MCU fun and have a little bit more of a serious conversation, man. Always welcome. I enjoy your takes on stuff, Jess. So don't be a stranger. Danya, anything you want to throw in before we get out of here for the evening?
No, I'm good.
All right, Jess, any last words for you?
I'm good also.
Hey, man, I'm gonna stay with the flow of things, and I'm good too, man. I appreciate you guys coming, everybody online checking us out. Continue to, and we look forward to our next engagement. Just stay safe. Mind the weather, because it's supposed to be some more stuff going on later this evening and into tomorrow. But stay safe. Don't forget to socially distance and wear your mask and all that wonderful stuff. And y'all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Everybody take care out there in the world.